Fachler, who is one of our most popular speakers, and whose subject tonight is the Irish Schindler, Marcus Witztum, a Holocaust hero who brought Jewish refugees to Ireland despite the Irish government's best endeavours.
By the way, total Israel-Irish time, 10 minutes, 5 minutes to 8. Thank you.
English-born, despite his American-sounding first name, Yanky Fachler moved to Israel after completing his university education and worked in the field of marketing communication. He also became active in the local theatre world, and this led to his attending an international drama festival in Ireland, where he first met his wife and eventually made his base in 1998. Now these days, Yanky Fachler is best known as a public speaker on aspects of Jewish history, Zionism and the Shoah. As the founder chairman of the Jewish Historical Society of Ireland, he frequently addresses members of the Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Ilford and Hertfordshire branches of the Jewish Historical Society of England, having spoken to our Israel branch on a number of occasions since 2011. Further afield, he has also appeared before audiences in the United States, Canada and Australia. You might call them the old colonies. This coming June he will be giving 2 talks at Manchester Liverpool. One of his books is entitled The Vow, Rebuilding the Fachler Tribe After the Holocaust, published in 2004. And that reminded me of George Clare's award-winning volume, Last Waltz in Vienna, published by Macmillan in 1981 and subtitled The Destruction of a Family, 1842 to 1942, in which Maurice Witztum and his rescue work are given a place of honour. Ladies and gentlemen, we now look forward to hearing more about this in Yanky Fachler's address. By the way, he's going to be sitting down. Oh, it is. Who's going to read that? Who's going to read that?
What a question. This can only cover it.
Certainly not. I keep away from that.
Firstly, I must admit something, that this is the earliest I've ever come, even to our own events, not even associated with anybody else. When we say 8 or 8:15, we get going by 8:30. It's called Israel-Irish time, but I see you're still on the old general mean time, so but that's changing Thursday night as well. I know I'm down to propose a vote of thanks to Yanky, but I did receive this yesterday from Her Excellency the Irish Ambassador, who cannot be here with us tonight. So I'll read this out briefly and then I'll get back on after Yanky and propose the vote of thanks. It gives me great pleasure to send greetings to the Israel branch of the Jewish Historical Society of England and members of the Israel-Ireland Friendship League on the occasion of the lecture by Yanky Fachler, chairman of the Jewish Historical Society of Ireland. Ireland is strongly committed to the study of the Holocaust and related events. This is reflected in, for example, government funding of the Holocaust Education Trust Ireland. Ireland is also a full member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance since 2011. And we have excellent relations with Yad Vashem here in Jerusalem, which I visited most recently just 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, I am prevented by other commitments from joining you this evening, but I extend good wishes for what I am sure will be an interesting evening. Alison Kelly, Ambassador of Ireland to Israel.
Ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, I will do this talk sitting down. I recently have had a bit of surgery, and getting up and sitting down is not good for my constitution. If you can't hear, I will use the mic. If you can hear, I'll continue without. Irish political leader Eamon de Valera had an unrealistic and over-romanticized vision of comely maidens dancing at the crossroads.
Absolutely.
He envisaged Ireland as a politically, economically, and culturally independent rural haven free from the corrupting influences of Britain and of industrialism. And while this vision drove de Valera's electoral successes in 1932 and 1933, it soon became clear that Ireland's anti-industrial policies were a disastrous failure. Fortunately, Ireland's Minister of Industry and Commerce, Sean Lemass, had a more realistic vision. He wanted to bring in factories, investors, managers, experts from industrialized countries such as the UK, Germany, France, Czechoslovakia, and Belgium. Of course, there were several conditions to be met. Only industries that could create employment in the west of Ireland would be considered. Only new industries that posed no threat to existing Irish industries would be considered, and only people regarded as offering specific manufacturing processes that were new to Ireland would be allowed into the country. There was one particular area of industry that fitted Lemass's vision like a glove: the schmutter trade, also known as the rag trade or the textile industry. And traditionally, Jews all over Europe were involved in the schmutter trade. I'm sure I'm not the only person here in the room whose parents, grandparents in Europe were involved in the schmutter trade. In Dublin, Jewish businessman Marcus Witztum was also in the schmutter trade. He was born in Poland, spent some years in Argentina and Belgium, before coming to Dublin, where he co-owned a shop selling Viennese textiles. When Witztum got wind of Lemass's quest for European industries to relocate to the west of Ireland, he spotted a unique convergence of circumstances. As a businessman with contacts in Europe's schmutter trade, Witztum knew he could help guide Lemass in the direction of potential textile industry candidates in Europe that did not compete with existing industries. And as a Jew, Witztum was acutely aware of the growing plight of the Jews of Europe since Hitler became Chancellor in 1933. Witztum also knew that the biggest challenge facing the Jews of Germany and later of Austria and Czechoslovakia was not getting out of these countries. The challenge was to find a country that would take them in. When US President Roosevelt convened the Evian International Conference in 1938 to discuss the refugee crisis of Jews trying to leave Germany, country after country cried crocodile tears over the plight of the Jews, while explaining that they could not possibly take in any Jews. The Irish delegate stated with impeccable logic, sure, no one came to the rescue of Ireland during the famine, so why should the Jews get special treatment now? And indeed, the Irish government took extraordinary measures to keep Jewish refugees out of Ireland. Jewish parliamentarian Robert Briscoe, a future Lord Mayor of Dublin who was close to de Valera, inundated the Department of Justice with requests to allow named individuals to seek refuge in Ireland. And he was assured that everything was being done to help. Robert's late son, Joe Briscoe, once told me that he was glad that his father was no longer alive when Irish state papers were released showing that government ministers and officials had consistently lied to his father during this entire period. Marcus Witztum was very aware that Ireland was rigidly maintaining its closed-door policy against Jewish refugees. but he was also intimately knowledgeable about the favourable conditions that Ireland had to offer textile industries from overseas. Irish social and wage standards, protective tariffs, quota restrictions. He knew all this stuff. Witztum came up with a daring plan that combined a solution to both challenges at the same time. Finding suitable candidate industries to relocate in Ireland and helping Jewish refugees find refuge in Ireland. In 1935-36, Witztum joined Lemass's head hunting commission to promote employment in the west of Ireland. Another member of the commission was Senator John Eddie Macklin, an industrialist who was close to Lemass. One of Macklin's companies delivered material for new factories, and Macklin used his vast network of political contacts, we would say protectia, to recommend where new enterprises should be located. When the Council of German Jewry sent a memorandum to the Irish government in 1936 regarding the possibility of Jewish refugee industrialists contributing to the Irish economy, Witztum made certain that Lemass responded in the affirmative. Witztum now started visiting Europe regularly, often with Lemass and Macklin in tow. What they did not know is that Witztum was using guile and chutzpah to navigate Lemass's head hunting commission exclusively in the direction of Jewish-owned businesses. Witztum's first success was in Paris, where Henri Orbach owned a small hat factory, Les Modes Modernes. Modern fashion? In the late 1920s, even before Hitler came to power, Orbach's sister Sophie and her husband Serge Philipson were strolling through a Berlin park when two German brown shirts shoved Sophie into some bushes. On the spot, Serge decided they would move to Paris, and his brother-in-law Orbach invited Serge to join Les Modes Modernes. When Witztum came knocking on Orbach's door to persuade him to relocate his hat factory to the west of Ireland, Orbach sent his brother-in-law Serge to Ireland on a reconnaissance and feasibility mission. Meanwhile, in Ireland, the Galway Industrial Development Association, GIDA, had just failed to secure a new factory that would have employed 50 people. Now, a factory for 50 people doesn't sound very much to us. But in those days, 50 people to be in employment was massive in Ireland of the 1930s. And the failure to secure the new factory was due to the lack of suitable premises in Galway. So when the GIDA heard that there was a prospect of Galway hosting a French hat factory, they were determined that Galway would not lose out again. Future President Erskine Hamilton Childers, son of Irish Republican Robert Erskine Childers, who was executed during the Irish Civil War, was Secretary of the National Agricultural and Industrial Development Association. He pushed hard for Galway to be chosen as the site for the hat factory. Serge Philipson visited Galway and reported enthusiastically back to Orbach in Paris. Galway, he said, presented the opportunity of a lifetime. The deal was sealed. It was agreed that Serge himself would oversee the establishment of Les Modes Modernes hat factory in Galway for a period of 5 years before handing over to an Irish manager. Because Serge's wife Sophie insisted on staying in Paris with her widowed mother Augusta and their daughter Rachel, Serge spent 1 week a month in Paris with them and the other 3 weeks in Galway. Every holidays, his wife and daughter joined him in Galway. When the establishment of the hat factory was announced officially in April 1937, 2/3 of the £60,000 capital, it's quite a lot, came from the Orbach group, the rest from local investors. The building materials for the factory, of course, were supplied by Senator Mackelin. Another investor in the Galway hat factory was Edmund Clessants, a prominent Catholic politician and former Belgian senator. Witztum probably knew Clessants from when he lived in Antwerp. Witztum, Mackelin and Orbach were among the directors of the Irish Les Modes Modernes. While the hat factory was under construction on the northeastern edge of Galway, hat production started in mid-August 1937 in temporary premises on Eyre Square, some of you might know. A showcase in Dublin's St Stephen's Green gave people an opportunity to see what the Galway factory had to offer. At the official opening ceremony in Galway's old railway hotel in July 1938, Minister Lemass proudly announced that Irish industries were, I quote, capable of facing comparison with industries in other countries. Michael Brown, the Bishop of Galway, did more than just bless the new enterprise at the opening ceremony. He gave Les Modes Modernes a significant marketing boost by publicly announcing from the pulpit that his lady parishioners should henceforth wear hats instead of tichels, instead of headscarves, when they came to church. Talk about product placement. The workers in the new factory needed training, and Witztum knew exactly where to find the experts he needed in Europe. And with the full backing of the Irish government, he legitimately secured visas for Jewish technicians, supervisors, designers, and people to train the locals. But he went a step further, and he did something that sets him apart from any other Jew in Ireland. He saw an opportunity of increasing the number of Jews receiving visas for Ireland by making sure that among the experts were Jews from a professional background who had little or no experience in industry. In fact, he probably brought in a Jewish non-expert for every legitimate Jewish expert. After a summer holiday with his family near the Belgian-German border in 1939, Serge begged his wife Sophie to return with him to Ireland. She was reluctant to leave her mother in Paris since she knew that her mother would not get an Irish visa. Even Witztum wouldn't have managed that. In August 1939, Sophie, the daughter Rachel, and other family members left Paris for Normandy. Following Nazi Germany's occupation of France in July 1940, the Philipson family joined Serge's brother Robert in the French Free Zone. August 1942, Sophie's sister Ella and her husband Ernest, their daughter Ruth, Serge's brother Robert, and sister Esther were all arrested by French police and deported, never to be heard of again. And in early 1943, Sophie, her mother Augusta, and Rachel joined Henri Orbach in the Hotel Victoria in Cannes. They were denounced, arrested, sent to Drancy transit camp, and on to a Nazi death camp in Poland. And the sole survivor of the Orbach-Philipson family was Serge's daughter Rachel, who managed to hide during the war. She returned to liberated Paris in August 1944, and her father Serge in Ireland persuaded his friend, the French commercial councillor in Dublin, Monsieur Lestocki, to personally travel to Paris to organize Rachel's repatriation to Ireland. Father and daughter were reunited in Dublin in June 1945, 6 years since they had last seen one another. Rachel married in 1951 and emigrated to Montreal in 1954. Sluggish demand for hats led to the eventual liquidation of Les Modes Modernes in the 1970s. Serge went on to become an art collector and was elected to the board of directors of the National Gallery of Ireland. He was never acknowledged in Ireland, but he was awarded the Légion d'honneur because of his involvement with the Alliance Française. We move on to the second of Marcus Witztum's success stories. Early 1939, Witztum was instrumental in bringing to Ireland Hugo Reiniger & Co., a hat manufacturer in Chomutov, a German-speaking town in the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia. There was great excitement in Castle Bar, County Mayo, when it was announced that a new factory for the millinery trade was to be established. Western Hats, as it was called, was registered in Ireland as a public company with a nominal capital of £100,000. One of the chief promoters was our friend, the Belgian Senator Klessens, and in May 1939 he was given the honour of digging the first sod of turf in Castle Bar. The board of directors of Western Hats included Macklin and Witztum. Construction began on a 9-acre site. The factory took 6 months to build and was the first building of its kind west of the River Shannon. The 350-foot red brick chimney remained a local landmark for Castle Bar and its surroundings up to the 1980s. Everything ran on natural sources: turf, water, steam, and daylight. And this was the first factory in Ireland built to use those natural resources. The last machines arrived from Belgium 1 week before Belgium was invaded by the Germans. On the last Friday in August 1940, the factory boiler was put into commission for the first time. With its modern lines and its green latticed windows, the Castle Bar hat factory was one of the most advanced in the country and would become one of the largest employers in the region, creating employment for hundreds of local people. And many Castle Bar families grew up on stories of family members with fond memories of the factory. There was even a Western Hats football team that competed in a local league. Soon, shops in Castle Bar were selling an excellent range of hats made by locals out of the very finest of materials in the latest style and shade and at a very reasonable price. In Castle Bar's Western Hats factory, as in Galway, Witztum weaved his magic. Once again, many of the so-called experts that Witztum brought to Ireland were professional Jews with little experience in running a factory. Fred Klepper was a marketing manager who'd moved from the Sudetenland to Prague. He heard about the hat factory in Castle Bar and received a work permit, even though he had no actual skills in the making of hats. But with their Irish visas in their hands, Fred and his wife Gretel and their daughter Doris, who died just last year, reached Castle Bar in the summer of 1939. Fred began working in the spinning department, and the family moved to an area of Castle Bar that the locals called Little Jerusalem, similar to an area in Dublin with the same name. Here are some lines from a Holocaust poem called The Hat Factory by Irish poet Paul Durcan. And what if you were a hatter, and you married a hatter, and all your sons and daughters worked as hatters, and you inhabited a hat house all full of hats, 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 the apotheosis of an ancient craft. And I think of all the nationalities of Israel and of how each always clings to his native hat, his priceless and movable roof, his hat which is the last and first symbol of a man's slender foothold on this earth. Delightful. Meanwhile, Marcus Witztum was busy negotiating for a third factory to move from Europe to Ireland. Emil Hirsch, a wealthy Jewish Viennese businessman, took over an unsuccessful textile factory and renamed it Hirsch Bandfabrik, the Hirsch Ribbon Factory. After the 1938 Anschluss, Hirsch was naturally interested in relocating with his factory and his family to safer pastures. When he learned from Witztum in late 1938 that Ireland was offering incentives to foreign industrialists to set up businesses in Ireland, Hirsch expressed an interest. At first it was suggested that the ribbon factory might locate to Galway, but Hirsch decided that the damp climate was unsuitable for ribbons. The alternative suggestion was Longford. So we've had Galway, we've had Castlebar, and now Longford. When local interest groups in Longford heard that there was a possibility of bringing over a ribbon factory, they invited Witztum and Mackelin to visit the town to assess local conditions. Longford had a lot going for it. It had road, rail and canal transport, it had water from the Camlin River, and it had a plentiful supply of employees. Erskine Childers once again makes a valuable contribution. By now he is the secretary of the Federation of Irish Manufacturers, and he used his Department of Industry and Commerce contacts to help secure Longford for the ribbon factory. And it was Childers who proudly announced to the Longford Development Association that he had persuaded Mackelin and Witztum to choose Longford. Childers also used his contacts in the Department of Defence to secure a vacant section of Connolly Army Barracks in Longford town. Construction began in late 1938, and in March 1939, the Department of Finance signed a 30-year lease agreement with Mackelin and Witztum for the Longford site. Hirsch, he's still in Vienna, had to pay considerable bribes to Nazi and SS officials, and he even spent a few days in prison. Yet amazingly, he became the only Jew in Austria ever to successfully ship his entire factory out of Austria after the Nazi Anschluss. The stock of ribbons and 21 looms arrived safely in Longford in May 1939, and Hirsch Ribbons was incorporated as a limited company in July. The board of directors, as you can guess already, included Mackelin, Witztum, Childers, and Hirsch. Hirsch Ribbons was the first industrial establishment in Longford and remained an influential economic and social institution for almost 4 decades. Hirsch himself became the managing director, and his son Robert, who spoke excellent English, was appointed general manager. To facilitate communication between the mainly German-speaking managers and the local staff, the company recruited a local Irish girl, Ruby Burns, who'd studied in Germany and spoke fluent German. Ruby was later to become Robert's wife, and their 2 children, Desmond and Jenny, both worked in the factory and later in the Dublin sales office. Hirsch lived in Dublin and ran the business from 24 Suffolk Street, which just happened to be Witztum's office. You see, and I only learned this relatively recently, the 3 factories that Witztum helped bring to Ireland, Western Hats in Castlebar, Hirsch Ribbons in Longford, and Les Modes Modernes in Galway, all had their headquarters in the same place in Witztum's own office. In other words, Witztum personally was able to coordinate production in all 3 sites. And once the Hirsch Ribbon Factory became operational in October 1939, Witztum made sure that the first orders to be processed went to the hat factories in Galway and Castlebar. As in Galway and Castlebar, there was an urgent need to train workers for the Longford factory. Hirsch and Witztum leveraged this need to secure the immediate granting of visas for employees of the Austrian Hirsch ribbon factory to come to Ireland. And again, Witztum successfully brought in non-specialists. The adventures and misadventures of some of these non-specialists brought over by Witztum are recorded in the best-selling memoir, which has already been introduced to you earlier by our German, Last Waltz in Vienna by George Clare, or as he was known then, Georg Klar. When George's father Ernst lost his job in his Viennese bank because he was a Jew, the non-Jewish owner of associated Austrian ribbon factories put him in contact with the Jewish competitor Emil Hirsch. And at Hirsch's insistence, Ernst, who had never stepped foot in a factory in his life, was deemed an expert who was urgently needed in the Longford ribbon factory. George and his parents followed Witztum's instructions and went to Berlin to collect their visas from the passport and visa section at the Irish legation. Earlier, we mentioned Ireland's strenuous measures to keep out Jewish refugees. In Berlin, this policy was implemented with great zeal by the Irish consul, a notorious anti-Semite called Charles Bewley. Bewley lied to the class, claiming that he'd received no instructions from Dublin regarding their visas. Witztum and Hirsch bombarded the Irish authorities with demands that the class be given their visas. In the meantime, Ernst accepted a position with his former employer in their French bank branch. The timing of the sudden emergence of the Irish visas for Stella and George Klar was hugely cynical. The date, the 10th of November, 1938. The morning after Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, which my late father witnessed as a 15-year-old. And the visas had been issued days earlier. Bewley had simply withheld them. A quick aside about Bewley and Kristallnacht. A few years ago, the curator of the Berlin Jewish Museum came up with a novel idea. She asked all the countries that had a diplomatic presence in Berlin at the time of Kristallnacht to send the reports from their Berlin diplomats about the pogrom. Even the Italian, Spanish, and Japanese diplomats expressed shock at what they witnessed. And the sole foreign diplomat stationed in Berlin, who sent back a report exonerating the Nazis and condemning the Jews, was, yes, you guessed it, Ireland's Charles Bewley. Bewley's shameful report was prominently displayed in the Berlin Museum. And the curator told me that when they started collecting these reports, she had no idea about Ireland. To anyone like some of us here familiar with the history of the Jews of Ireland, Bewley is no surprise. This is the island where during the 1930s, self-styled inquisitors like Father Dennis Fahy, who went on to found the anti-Semitic Maria Duce movement, worked assiduously to disclose Jewish conspiracies. This is the island where in 1943, Oliver James Flanagan made his maiden speech in the Irish Parliament. He accused the Jews of crucifying Jesus and of crucifying the Irish people every day. I quote, "There is one thing that Germany did, and that was to rout the Jews out of their country. Until we rout the Jews out of this country, it doesn't matter a hair's breadth what orders you make. Where the bees are, there is the honey, and where the Jews are, there is the money." How many parliamentarians walked out of the chamber when they heard this gutter talk from Flanagan?
None.
Not a single.
Wow.
Back to the class. Stella and her son George travelled to Longford, ostensibly to work at the Hirsch ribbon factory. George may have spent a few days there. George even roomed with Robert Hirsch for a while. Through Witztum's intervention, George, his father Ernst, who was now in Paris, eventually received his Irish visa, but he made the tragic decision to remain in his Paris bank job. Stella Clark missed her husband so much that she left the safety of Ireland to join her husband Ernst in Paris. Her timing could not have been worse. She arrived in Paris on the 4th of September, the day after World War II was declared. Ernst was repeatedly interned by the French and then by the Vichy authorities and was arrested by the French police in August 1942, which is why the title of the book says The Destruction of a Family Ending in 1942. He was deported to Auschwitz, where both he and Stella perished. Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Witztum was the common thread linking all three factories. Western Hats in Castle Bar, Hirsch Ribbons in Longford, and Les Modes Modernes in Galway. It was Witztum, with his close links with the European schmatter trade, who found a way of promoting the Irish economy while at the same time helping the Jews of Europe. It was Witztum who was responsible for creating 600 precious jobs in the west of Ireland. At the time, this was regarded as nothing short of a miracle. It was Witztum's genius that the industries moving to Ireland were Jewish industries. It was Witztum's genius that the Jewish-owned factories needed experts from Europe to help train the local employees, and it was Witztum's genius that enabled several non-expert Jews to join these Jewish experts. The Irish immigration authorities didn't notice, and the local Irish media presented the Jewish refugees as conduits of modern industrial processes in the transference of new skills to Irish workers. No mention, thank goodness, was made of the fact that most of these experts were Jews fleeing from Hitler. Somehow the press did not catch on to this. And by successfully combining his business activities with his humanitarian activities, Witztum personally accounted for about half of all the Jews who found sanctuary from the Holocaust in Ireland. When I recently gave a radio interview about the hat and ribbon factories, the presenter remarked that the Witztum story reminded him of Schindler's List. And of course, the parallels are striking because both Schindler and Witztum exploited the realms of industry and employment to save Jews from the Holocaust. During my research for this talk, I met Jenny Hirsch, the daughter of Emil Hirsch, who started the Hirsch ribbon factory in Longford. I met people who worked in the Castle Bar factory. And after I gave this talk in Dublin, word got out, and I was invited to address historical societies in Castle Bar and in Strokestown. I contributed to a radio program on the three factories. And I only recently discovered that my sister Melanie's late brother-in-law, Alan Bar Natan, had changed his name from Witztum and was a nephew of Marcus Witztum. And I was clueless about that. And I'm very, very happy that some of Alan's family are here with us this evening. It took the UK far too long to introduce a Hero of the Holocaust award. Eventually they did, and belatedly gave a posthumous award to Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schonfeld. Some of you will know of his exploits. By rights, in my humble opinion, Ireland should also create its own Hero of the Holocaust award. One obvious candidate would be Mary Elmes, the first and only Irish person honoured as a righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem for rescuing 200 Jewish children in France under the noses of the authorities during the Holocaust. And the other obvious candidate for Ireland's Hero of the Holocaust award would of course be Marcus Witztum. Will Ireland ever initiate a Hero of the Holocaust award? No. Don't hold your breath. Thank you very much.
Right, Yanky will be pleased to answer questions if there are any. Anybody who wishes to ask a question, would they please identify themselves? Gentlemen over there.
Could we ask
Name,
that
please.
Stanton, could we ask that mobiles be turned off, please?
I'll answer that, yes.
Right, thank you, Stuart. Next questioner. Gentleman over there. Name, please.
The name is...
Name, please.
Yes.
Ah.
The name is Jeffrey Fine, and actually my wife and I are from Ottawa, Canada. And I was struck by some of the parallels between your account of the Irish stance towards Jews fleeing Hitler and what was revealed over the last few decades about the Canadian policy. And this came again through initially a release of records,
Yep.
which showed that, well, on the public record, Canada probably had the worst record of any of the countries taking in Jews. Secondly, it prompted, on the basis of the National Archives, the publication of a book, None Are Too Many.
Yes, that was the phrase that was used. None are too many.
None are too many. It revealed that Vincent Massey, who later became the first Canadian-born Governor General, in fact prided himself, while he was Canada's High Commissioner to the UK, on keeping Jews out of Canada. And also, the record shows, again, it's just quite uncanny with the situation in Ireland, that the Deputy Minister of Immigration, and the Deputy Minister in the Canadian Parliament is a permanent civil servant, not a politician, but that the Deputy Minister of Immigration in Canada, who was given a public award, was in fact a notorious anti-Semite. Paralleling your Mr. Bewley
yes.
in Germany. And I just find it quite uncanny that these things are coming out now, or over the last few decades.
Absolutely, and I know about Canada, and I know what the Canadian delegate said in Evian, and all I can say is Ireland and Canada were in very good company. Australia said the same. They said things like, we don't have a problem with anti-Semitism and we don't want to create one. So obviously then, don't bring in Jews. And so, you know,
And the United States, of course.
Oh, absolutely. So while nobody can excuse Ireland's policy, they were by no means alone. The fact that Bewley was in Berlin and everyone knew who he was. It's not that people said, oh, Bewley in Berlin, he's an anti-Semite, he was an open anti-Semite, and he was not recalled. And that also says, it says something. Yeah. Thank you.
Incidentally, I thought Mackenzie King also had quite a lot to do with Canadian policy.
Very much so.
I'm sorry, I would just say about Mackenzie King, in his favour, when it came to the UNSCOP, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, Mackenzie King chose Judge, my memory is just gone, a Canadian judge And that Canadian judge eventually swung the entire committee round and came back to the United Nations with a recommendation that when the subject comes up in the General Assembly, it should be that there should be partition rather than a recommendation that there shouldn't be partition. So Mackenzie King did one thing good.
Jonathan.
Hello, Jonathan.
Are there any remains of Jewish existence in the three towns?
No. The answer is no. Some people, elderly people, remember some of the managers and their families who lived there, but as far as we know, in the end, no Jews remained. So that eventually, I reckon, that the factories were handed over fully to the to local Irish managers. But there are memories still in these towns of the Jewish presence. Yeah.
Do you have a number of how many people he saved?
Sorry,
Malky Ben Meyer, sorry, Malky Ben Meyer.
Okay, Malky, I don't have a number. It's very difficult to find a number because so much of this was done by subterfuge. But my guess would be that he probably brought for the three factories up to 30 Jewish experts who were bona fide experts. And by my reckoning, if you look at the Clares and other families, probably another 25 to 30 who were not experts. And those 55, 60 people are by far the biggest proportion of Jews who got through the iron gate that the Irish had put down.
What about their families?
Well, I'm including family members.
Oh, you are.
Yes, because like the Clares, so 3 people came.
Name, please.
Chuck Copp.
Yes, Tom.
I just want to say that the Chief Justice of the Canadian Court was influenced greatly by our founder, William Hull.
Yes.
He was an evangelical minister.
I've been, thanks to you, Chuck, I've been to Canada and I've given a talk in the church from where Reverend Hull emerged from before he came to Palestine, and I told them there the story of how Hull influenced Ivan, I'm getting there, Judge Ivan, by the end of the evening I'll remember. Rand. Thank you. And Ivan Rand was, again, from our point of view, one of the heroes of the establishment of the state. There's no doubt about it.
Jared Laukov, in these 3 areas that you're talking about, were the Jews keeping a very low profile, or were they actually maybe a big visit, or a Jewish community?
They chose to live. They chose to live close to each other, which makes sense. I never heard of any minion, either in Gore. I'm not saying there wasn't, but I never heard of that. That has not been reported anywhere of any house of worship. But they stuck together, and of course, eventually, they must have kept contact with Dublin anyway, because eventually that's where they went, or Cork, but probably Dublin.
George Clare's book actually makes it fairly clear that within a generation of the Eastern Europe Jewish background, these Viennese Jews had become highly assimilated. They never seemed to go to shul very often. Well, they certainly didn't keep kosher.
Don't forget, they started as the most highly assimilated in Europe anyway. The if you like, the big shock in this book is the shock that the Clares experienced with the Anschluss. They had no idea of the anti-Semitism in Austria. They had managed to live their lives quite, you know, a banker, etc., etc.
Exactly, bankers, etc. They were the rich ones.
Yes.
I came from Vienna, the Ostjugend, and we were quite a different sort.
You certainly were, but
Yes, I've read that book,
yes,
and I
and they
know
were
about it.
highly assimilated.
Yes.
And so, and they remained assimilated, and eventually disappeared off the Jewish map. Yes.
Can you explain in the picture who are the Witztums here? There are a few Witztums.
So, okay, starting from the right-hand side, that's Elsa Hirsch, that's Emil Hirsch's wife, and next to him, the guy with the white hair, that's Emil Hirsch himself. That's the ribbon factory. I've no idea who Hearn is, but the next one is Marcus Witztum. There's a guy with a hat, I don't know who he is, and Marcus Witztum is the next one. Next to him is a guy called Ernst Sonnenschein, and quite a few people in Ireland remember him. And next to him is George Clark. The youngest looking guy there, that's George Clark, before he went on to become a British officer. Then there is, I think, Mrs. Witztum. Yes, the one with the hat and the checked dress. Somebody called Alwa Goebel. What a name for a Jewish guy. Yeah, and so I don't know the others.
See, there's another Witztum.
No, here. That's Mrs. Witztum. That's Mrs. Witztum. And the other photos, there's again Emil Hirsch in the bottom right-hand corner, Robert Hirsch's Aliens Order Certificate, that's Emil's son, and that's a photo of the army barracks in Longford Town where the factory was built.
Good. Very good.
I will now have pleasure in calling upon Malcolm Gafson, head of the Israel-Ireland Friendship League, to propose a vote of thanks.
Looking out at the audience tonight, I see Carol and Colin and a good friend at the back, Brian and Chava, and of course Leslie. And I think we have a turnout tonight of about 75–80% of all our members here in Jerusalem. As the majority of them. Louise, of course. Louise, of course. So there's quite a big turnout here tonight. Most of our members are down more towards the coast, the Sharon area, and points a little bit north and a little south. But we're still, what we have here in Jerusalem is not so many in numbers, but more in quality as far as our members are concerned. Thank you, Gabby. It's really good. I think it's the first time that the Israel-Ireland Friendship League are associating with the Jewish Historical Society of England.
That's not awful.
Let's put it this way, it mightn't be the last of this. There may be more coming along. It depends what the topic and what the subject is. I'm sure many of the Irish here, when I say the Irish, I mean the Irish born here tonight, listening to Yanky, and I must compliment Yanky. He really went through, wow. I mean, the last time I heard all of this was, thought I was knee-high, you know, listening from my grandfather and my father about the tales of what happened, because they lived through those years. As the parents of the Irish we have here tonight, they lived through those years, the years of neutrality. And by the way, Irish neutrality was not anti-Allies, or it was not pro-German. It was a symbol of Irish independence. Perhaps some people felt they went one way too much or not the other way. And even state records have come out recently that the Irish government under De Valera, who was a staunch neutralist as far as anything was concerned, did help the Allies unofficially. Very, very much so. And anybody in Ireland, my father was a member of the Irish Home Guard. He went out every night and they looked for parachutists coming down. If they were German, they arrested them and they were interned in County Meath, a place where they now Newbridge, Selbridge, where they raised the horses, well-known Irish racing horses, and there was a camp there for all the Germans who had shifted over, flown out of their planes, and where the winds brought them over into Ireland. They were arrested and put into an internment camp. Beside them was another internment camp for the Allies, any British or Americans ready, also who were shot down, parachuted and came and landed over in Ireland. They were also arrested, equally. At the time they treated them all very, very equally. They were put into another internment camp. Besides, there was a third one, by the way. The third one was that any Irish person, even acting on, being pro or aiding Nazi Germany, was interned as well. And I talk about the IRA at the time, who were notorious, shouting out Britain's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity, and perhaps even to a united Ireland. So you have these three internment camps. I know what we're hearing tonight from Yanky, and it's not all untrue. It's not all untrue. There was afterwards, when the files opened up, and after the Second World War, the Irish had nothing to be proud of as far as their allowing Jewish immigration into Ireland. By the way, we heard a lot about Erskine Childers. A few years back, I had the honour of taking part in this Morano's conference in the Netanya College, and it was the Secret Jews of Ireland. And Erskine Childers was mentioned because his family originally came into Ireland. They were Morano Jews, and they lived like Morano Jews. We heard about De Valera. De Valera, by the way, was accused by this same Flanagan of shouting over across to him, "You have Jewish blood running in your veins, you're a Morano Jew," he shouted at him. De Valera, of course, got up immediately and said, "I haven't got an ounce of Jewish blood running through my veins," and yet there was research into him. His name was De Valera. He did Valeros. There was an area in Spain. Valeros was a big community of Morano Jews before they made their way out, went towards Amsterdam, and got to New York, or it was then New Amsterdam, etc., etc. So his father could have been very, very well from Jewish Morano stock that came out of Spain. Once again, you know, us like Irish here tonight, knowing the history of the subject matter of the Witztum family. In fact, I had the pleasure of knowing the Witztum family in Westfield Road in Dublin. We lived around the corner in Kenilworth, and we knew that very much so. I think your cousins, and I think it was your uncle, the brother of Marcus, right? Yeah, we grew up together. We heard all these stories. We heard them all, and wow, that this guy was a real hero, Marcus Witztum. At the same time, I say this, that you cannot just pick on Ireland. Yes, perhaps to the extent it was shameful about letting in Irish refugees, but how worse or how better were they than any other country in Europe? We hear a lot, and I know you're all mostly ex-Brits here tonight, right? No. And of course, you always have this great proudness to say and talk about the kinder transport, right? And it was a great feat of the British to let these kids in. But I had a neighbour, he passed away 2 years ago. He was a kinder transport boy. He got in there, and he came from Vienna, the same Vienna we're talking about, hand in hand with his madricha, all the way onto the trains, all the way to the Hook of Holland.
I was there.
And over, thank you, and over into England. I think you got into Norwich, am I right? Norwich. Well, you know I'm a Brit. You know, Waterford I know about, Rosslare I know, Cork, but this other place I wouldn't. And he hadn't come to this madricha's hand all the way. When he got there, he was pulled away from this girl, like the other Madrechim and Madrechot, over the age of 18. They didn't let them in, the British. They only let in the young kids, pre-puberty, pre-whatever age, but the older ones, they sent back on the ship. These Madrechim and Madrechot, they were taken on arrival, and they ended up you know where. So let us not all say that the Irish were, how can I tell it again? We don't condone in any way the actions of the Irish. But if you have to look about it, you've got to go right across the board. That famous ship, I think we didn't mention it here tonight, was St. Louis. Hitler, that was Hitler's big joke. He said, get the Jews on the boat. Let's see what country brings them in. Come on, let's see what country brings them in. And there they opened their mouths afterwards about our anti-Semitism and our anti-Jewish or sending the Jews off to camps. None of them took them in. Maybe Cuba,
the only ones that survived the war.
Let me put it this way to you. They took some off, but not all of that ship. Anyway, let's get the historic facts right tonight here. Anyway, moving on. Once again, I'm sure you're all enthralled. It was a very enlightening talk by Yanky here tonight, very, very much so. He mentioned, by the way, Mary Elms. Last June or July, we had an event, and we showed a very, very special movie for The Bell Tolls. It's a very, in fact, if anybody can get hold of us, it's a documentary made on the life of Mary Elms, the only Irish citizen, as Yanky mentioned, to be awarded from Yad Vashem, the award of Righteous Amongst the Nations, very much so. And by the way, Yanky, Limerick, her hometown, recently honoured her, and they have now a square in Limerick called the Mary Elms Square, and there's a plaque up there, actually in detail, very much in detail, denoting what she did, how she saved the Jews, etc., etc. In conclusion, we're all here in Israel, right? Let's mention something about Israel. Why not? You know, we're all one here. We're all the same. We're all on the one side here. It's not them and us. It's only us. It's only us. At the end, thank you. I have a vote of thanks, please.
You came in, you made a racket, but you came in. Now you're making a racket now. I'm not going early.
Excuse me. Please. Please.
I've been here for years.
But you're
never at any point given a vote of thanks longer than the speaker.
Yes, but you never had any Irish person. I just want to get off with De Valera, just one thing. And Robert Briscoe, Bobby Briscoe as he was called. Also my family, my grandfather and Bobby Briscoe were the closest and closest of friends. Used to have a good play of cards together, even had a few bets on the races together. But that's besides it. De Valera, after the war ended, Bobby Briscoe went to him. He was a member of the revisionist Zionists. He was a member of, a supporter of Etzel. He went to De Valera and he said, we've got to feed the Jews coming out of Europe. We also have to supply arms to the clandestine underground forces in Palestine who are fighting the British. De Valera heard fighting the British. He gave them all the choices of cattle, plus all the boxes of ammunition and rifles they could put into that boat, and they sailed to break the blockade, the British blockade, who were keeping out the remnants of those Jews trying and getting after their 5 years through the Holocaust and concentration camps to get into the land of Israel. Yanky, in conclusion again, what I can say is this is a reunion tonight. This is a reunion tonight because many years back, and I think Carol will remember too, we had these various amateur dramatic nights. And we used to work very closely together, and I'm glad I have the opportunity tonight to put this vote of thanks to Yanky. And I always said to Yanky, one day I'm going to pin something on you. I don't know what it is, but I'll find something. Tonight I have something to pin on Yanky. And Yanky, if you stand up, or you can stand up, well, age creeps up on us all. Here we go. I'm going to pin this on you. At long last, we pin something on you, Yanky. Not at all. Pin that on you there. Go through your shirt, put it on. Good on you. That's it. Thank you very, very much. And thank you to Yanky for his very
Ladies and gentlemen, last time able to make a few announcements.